Bonjour, hi, Canada. It is Hugh Hewitt. Good morning to you on this Monday. I am very, very pleased to be with you. I'm back in town, went away for the weekend, drove my 4 hours, saw my daughter and the fetching Mrs. Hewitt, and came back, and so my back is whacked, but nevertheless, happy to be here. Let me give you the rundown. The rundown on this Monday is the coronavirus is back in China. Half of Beijing districts report new coronavirus cases. 79 people hospitalized, 36 new infections in the Chinese capital city. And given the fact that it's an authoritarian dictatorship, they've locked it down. We don't do that. We encourage people to stay home. They just weld doors shut, and everything is vacant in Beijing again. We'll keep you posted. But that has had an impact on financial markets as stocks sink after the jump in China and in U.S. had some spikes in various places, but not the hospitalizations that China reports. So I want to do the international market check. I never do American markets in the morning because who knows where they're going to be in the afternoon. But let me see what is going on abroad. This is brought to you by Birch Gold. Go to hughgold.com, hughgold.com, or text my name, Hugh, H-U-G-H, to 474747. Gold is holding steady at $1,718 an ounce, $1,718. Originally, I told you to buy and diversify into gold when it was at $1,400. It's been above $1,700 now, I think unbroken for the last 2 months. If the inflation I expect in the near term, I don't mean 3 or 4 years down the road, I mean within the year, gold will continue to advance. But even if it doesn't, even if it goes back to $1,400, it's the part of your portfolio that is always indestructible. So please go to hughgold.com and have Birch Gold send you the material on rolling over a portion of your IRA, 10, 15, 20%. Buying some gold for your safety deposit box. Always have some gold in your mix. Like real estate, it's like stocks, it's like bonds. Fully diversified portfolio. Precious metals should be a part of that. And the place to do that is Birch Gold at hughgold.com. When we looked on Friday, it was a good day for everybody. The Dow was up 477 points. The NASDAQ was up 96. The S&P was up 39. But abroad today, Japan closed down almost 3.5%. Again, the return of coronavirus to China means that even though the West is disentangling itself from the PRC at a rapid fashion under President Trump's leadership, we're still intertwined. Production is still there. It's moving to India. It's moving to Vietnam, but it's still deeply in China. In England, late in the day, the stocks are down 1%. Even later in the day in Germany, they're down 1%. Not terrible. Not a rout. It's a concern. I believe this is going to be the last day of the concern as they factor in, okay, maybe there'll be a second wave in the summer and maybe in the United States. But as the Wall Street Journal notes, there's also in China a second economic story. Chinese consumers are adding to the factory-led economic recovery. So Chinese consumers were locked down for 3 or 4 months. They are out and buying, or at least they were outside of Beijing this weekend, and that's beginning to percolate through, much like the turn to Amazon and Costco and Target and the other direct-to-delivery, direct-to-home. By the way, I had dinner out last night back in Northern Virginia with a senior Trump administration official. And we think the summer, and we dine socially distanced outdoors. Most of Virginia is now eating outside, but the restaurants are doing well, and they're expanding menus slowly, and they're bringing back wait staff slowly, so that's very good. Did the same thing on Saturday afternoon with the family down south in Virginia, and the Wall Street Journal's op-ed page says, new rules for COVID summer. Be flexible and vigilant. America is entering a complicated new phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, writes the Journal. The remainder of 2020 warrants flexibility and tolerance, trying different ways to adapt to new evidence. In a country with such fractured politics, this will be no small challenge. Part of my conversation with our senior unnamed Trump administration official was, how do we rebuild the credibility of the public health people? In every state, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, how do we rebuild credibility when they were absent? And I understand why they were absent. I'm not critical of them. No one could speak in the face of the giant demonstrations following the murder of George Floyd. And that may be impossible to reintroduce them this week because now there is the killing of a man in Atlanta, 27-year-old Rashard Brooks. Notice I say murder of George Floyd because I've reached my conclusion on George Floyd. He was murdered. I don't know enough about Mr. Brooks, although it looks bad for the Atlanta police, and I'm glad that the Atlanta police chief stepped down. You heard me say on this show last week, when a controversial killing of a civilian by police occurs, whether that civilian is white or black or Latino or Native American or checkerboard, the police chief in that town ought to immediately step down if it appears to be an unwarranted use of lethal force. Accountability goes to the chief if the chief can't set it up the right way. I also believe that there ought to be maybe a federal law requiring the immediate disestablishment of a police union in any city in which such a civil rights violation occurs. One thing I would like to hear African-American leaders address, I'm going to talk to Ben Carson about this later today, is the fact that the two greatest impediments to reform in their community are police unions and teachers' unions. And by far the worst is teachers' unions. Police, law enforcement officers out there listening to me, I love you people, and you will always have me to protect you against false charges. But I haven't heard of one of you defend the officers involved in the murder of Floyd. I don't know much about the Atlanta situation yet. I've read the story. I've watched the video, some of it off screen. I do not know how close the individual was, Mr. Brooks, when he turned with the taser. I don't know if a taser is lethal force. I don't think that's justified, but I'm going to wait and see. But it's a DUI, and he ran away. How could you shoot the guy? So I think we have a second police killing unjustified, but not brutal like George Floyd, deadly like George Floyd, but not 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I'm going to play for you, by the way. I want you to be prepared. I'm going to play for you a lot of the Reverend Al Sharpton's eulogy of George Floyd. I listened to it twice this weekend, and there's a lot of it I do not like. He attacks President Trump. I don't like it, but there's a lot of it you ought to hear because I don't think you ever hear anything like this. And I didn't know Reverend Al Sharpton could actually preach this way. It's fairly comprehensive and not a little inspiring. And I want to play it for you before Ben Carson because this show talks about what people need to hear. And you need to hear the perspective of the black community articulately expressed through the Reverend Al. You may not like Al. I like Al. A lot of you don't like Al. Larry Elder doesn't like Al. I think Al has changed over the course of the 30 years I've known him into a responsible critic, though we don't agree on anything. I enjoy being on his show. And I want you to hear that. But this Atlanta shooting has sparked new outrage. That is the key rundown story of the day. I don't know if people have the energy to do it all again. I don't know. The Washington Post, killing of black man in Atlanta puts spotlight anew on police as prosecutors contemplate charges against officers. I'll wait for the prosecutors on that. Then, from the New York Times, police killings prompt reassessment of laws allowing deadly force. And that might be appropriate. I don't know. I believe police reform is pretty far advanced in most places in the United States. But as you will hear Al Sharpton say in hour two, how do these people get into the force in the first place? What about qualified immunity? That's a court-created doctrine, by the way, that my friend Clark Neely thinks is terrible. I'm not an expert in it. And police unions protecting everyone, like teachers' unions protecting the worst teachers. Why do we have them? Where did they come from? Why do we not get rid of them? Police unions and teacher unions are the worst things to happen to American public policy, and especially the inner cities in the last 100 years. Police unions and teachers unions do a lot of good things, but they always end up protecting the worst of the worst because of their union approach. And that's not good for anyone. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Portions of the Hugh Hewitt Show are brought to you in part by the Job Creators Network Foundation.
This is Owen Strand for townhall.com. A call is going out now for the dismantling of the Minneapolis Police Department. The president of the city council said this when asked about what to do in the case of a break-in.
Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors. And I know, and myself too, and I know that that comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more harm is done.
There's no doubt that our cities and communities need restoration, including greater peaceful engagement between police and citizens. Yet the idea that wanting protection is privilege is not sound. In fact, it's absurd and won't restore anything. Police who act unjustly are accountable to the rule of law and must be. But there is no need to qualify what a society without police will look like. More harm will surely be done. May coming days bring greater safety and meaningful restoration. I'm Owen Strand.
ADF, fighting for those whose religious freedom is being violated. If anybody doubted how strong America is, look at all we've been through in the past few months and understand why we're still standing. We're still standing because we believe in the bonds that bring us together. We believe in freedom and liberty. And we believe that after all we've been through, nothing can defeat us. So let's cheer as America gets ready to rebuild and remake our lives bigger, stronger, better than ever before. Keep it here to find out how. We are the answer. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
Heard somebody the other day say, Drew Brees made a gutsy statement in favor of the flag, the American flag. Really? And I said to myself, well, that's Drew Brees. He's always been a class act. And he doesn't agree with this kneeling, and said so. Now, why that is some sort of great act of courage says a whole lot about where we are in our society. And then something else happened. You know what that something else is? He apologized. I should have known more. I didn't realize. Have a much better understanding now. What is going on? This is the opposite of the racism that the people seem to think exists in this country. Zero tolerance. I will never agree with anybody disrespecting the flag of the United States of America or our country. Let me just tell you what I see or what I feel when the national anthem is played and when I look at the flag of the United States. End of quote. That's how I feel. I'm supposed to apologize for that? Did he make demands that his teammates not kneel? No. Did he call out any of his teammates for kneeling by name? No. I disagree with it, and therefore I've got to apologize?
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Exclusive from General Flynn. This is at westernjournal.com. Freedom is oxygen, like the air we breathe that keeps our lungs full and our hearts beating. The celestial feeling of freedom brings a sense of peace to our souls. Freedom must never be taken for granted. Securing our freedom demands a high price. And that price requires hard work and sacrifice. Both will bind us all by the value they produce, but only if we are willing to seek new opportunities and new ideas. Those who have sacrificed the most, those who have given the last true measure of devotion that deserves.
Subscribe on YouTube today.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I hope you're watching on YouTube or on Instagram right now, because I'd like you to see as well as hear some of President Trump's address to the graduates of West Point class of 2020. He went to West Point on Saturday, gave a very good speech. Very few people saw it because, of course, it's Saturday and people are out and about on Saturday. I'd like to begin with the president's cut number 5. The president salutes the creed of West Point, which always bears hearing again and again. Cut number 5.
Today you graduate as one class, and you embody one noble creed: duty, honor, country. Every graduate on this field could have gone to virtually any top-ranked university that you wanted. You chose to devote your life to the defense of America. You came to West Point because you know the truth. America is the greatest country in human history, and the United States military is the greatest force for peace and justice the world has ever known. The survival of America and the endurance of civilization itself depends on the men and women just like each of you. It depends on people who love their country with all their heart and energy and soul. It depends on citizens who build, sustain, nurture, and defend institutions like this one. That is how societies are made and how progress is advanced. What has historically made America unique is the durability of its institutions against the passions and prejudices of the moment. When times are turbulent, when the road is rough, what matters most is that which is permanent, timeless, enduring, and eternal. It was on this soil that American patriots held the most vital fortress in our war for independence. It was this school that gave us the men and women who fought and won a bloody war to extinguish the evil of slavery within one lifetime of our founding.
He also went on to talk about the great graduates of West Point, not a Confederate, thank God, among them. Cut number 6.
It was the graduates of West Point, towering figures like MacArthur, Patton, Eisenhower, and Bradley, who led America to victory over the sinister Nazis and imperial fascists 75 years ago. It was under the leadership of West Point graduates like the legendary General Matthew Ridgway that the Army was at the forefront of ending the terrible injustice of segregation. It was Army strength that held the line against brutal opposition and oppression from communism. And it has been thanks to patriots like you that America has climbed to new heights of human achievement and national endeavor. This is your history. This is the legacy that each of you inherits. It is the legacy purchased with American blood at the crest of Little Round Top, on the crimson beaches of Normandy, in the freezing mud of Bastogne, and the dense jungles of Vietnam. It is the legacy of courageous, selfless, faithful patriots who fought for every inch of dirt with every ounce of strength and every last scrap of heart and drive and grit that they had. And they did it because they believed in the undying principles of our founding.
That's President Trump at West Point on Saturday. I'll play some more clips from it. It was a marvelous address. I don't know if you saw much about it, but it hit all the right notes. President Trump swinging into West Point to the reassembled cadets to say thank you to them and to their families watching by remote television It was a great speech. I'll play more of it for you right after the break. You are listening to and stay tuned to The Hugh Hewitt Show.
Attention business owners. As America gets back to work, will customers know you're there? With little warning, the coronavirus attacked our nation and our well-being in ways we never anticipated. The tragic loss of life, unprecedented economic upheaval, and a shattered sense of security has left many individuals and businesses in shambles. While the aftershocks could be felt for months to come, they may not have to. There is hope for an extraordinary turnaround of your bottom line. But will you be prepared for America's grand reopening? All signs point to the biggest business opportunity of our lifetime, coming as early as this summer. A recent survey of local advertisers shows a 10-point jump in the number of local advertisers who plan to maintain or increase their spending. 1 in 4 businesses expect to spend more in advertising by the end of June, and more than half expect to restart or surge their spending by this summer. As the numbers forecast increased spending from advertisers across the country, will your message be seen and heard? Will your business benefit from the pent-up consumer demand? Salem Surround is prepared to help you deliver the right advertising message to reach all potential customers wherever they are. Your business can be ready for a post-COVID-19 economy, but the time to act is now. Be at the front of the line as our economy begins to fire on all cylinders once again. For a free assessment of your marketing message and strategy, visit salemsurround.com or contact your local media strategist today.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Hey, folks, welcome back. I'm talking to Charlie Kirk. Charlie, one of the most disturbing things I've seen recently is some of these activists who are clearly bullies. I mean, there's a violence. You can feel it, that they're very angry and they're approaching strangers on the street and demanding that these strangers take a knee or that the cops take a knee. And I just think I've never seen anything so ugly that cops are being yelled at to take a knee. I mean, they should say, well, I'll take a knee if you take a knee for Jesus Christ. You go first.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal point, and I'm going to use it, which is, these are people that won't kneel for God, but they'll kneel because of some sort of pre-described class guilt. And so this is a really important point, Eric, which is this whole idea of white privilege is a racist and sinister lie that is taught to our kids from a very, very young age. And I find the whole idea morally reprehensible, that your identity, your skin color, that's not even your identity, by the way, that's just your appearance. Let's just make that very clear. That identity actually can mean a lot more. It could be your thoughts, your feelings, your worldview. And actually what has made the West so different, which was an idea that Jesus talked about, and people don't recognize this, is that equality under the law was nowhere to be seen. I mean, the Roman Republic paled in comparison to the Christian ethic. When Christ said, no, you're all equal under the eyes of God. We just forget and we just throw that all out in our society. That's why Trump holding up that Bible was so significant.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Here's the former vice president asserting that the sitting president is going to attempt to steal the election on November 3rd. This is what he said.
It's my greatest concern, my single greatest concern. This president's going to try to steal this election. This is the guy who said that all mail-in ballots are fraudulent, voting by mail, while he sits behind the desk in the Oval Office and writes his mail-in ballot to vote in the primary.
That's his biggest fear, is that Donald Trump will steal the election. So here we go again with, it was Russia, right? Russia interfered with the election in 2016. Russia got Trump elected, according to the narrative that resulted in an investigation, which led to a complete rebuke of that dubious claim. But it looks like they're going to go back to it again. They're going to go back to election fraud.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. America has been doing some soul searching lately. Perhaps you noticed. We're examining what's right with America and what can be made better. No other country does this kind of introspection better than us. Some of what we found we don't like and will change. Every life has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. That includes our law enforcement as well as every skin color. We've been through this before in America, and we always came out stronger. We will this time too. Our hosts will make sure of that. We are the answer.
But on Monday, June 15th, 2020, in the year of the plague, we lost about 350 Americans yesterday to the virus, but the country is reopening. It will not stay shut. People are calculating the risk, and I believe we have intuited the rules, which are if you are older than 70, you really ought not to go out. If you're older than 80, definitely not. If you are sick, stay home, even if you've got a head cold, because coronavirus doesn't often hit people hard if they're younger and in good shape. You've got to exercise if you're my age, 64. You got to be in good shape, because if it gets you, you want to have your respiratory system going. I'll tell you more about that, but I think we've intuited that you can go for ice cream. You can walk around outside. You can run. Wear masks if you can. Try and be as responsible as possible. We'll get through this. I think schools are going to reopen. They have to. America is going to just put its head down, adopt common sense policies, and move forward. And school districts, if you're listening, open your schools. And if you have older teachers, retire them. Give them packages and retire them, because they are at risk. Not your younger teachers, by and large, not your students, almost all of them, your older teachers. Time to give them buyouts and make it possible for them to retire with dignity, but to also clear your school. You can't hold a hostage, everybody in the school hostage, for your oldest quartile, quintile, 1/10 of the school. I want to go back to President Trump speaking at West Point, because not many of you heard it. It was a very good speech. This is cut number 7, the president at West Point on Saturday.
They did it because they cherished their homes, their faith, their family, and their flag. And they did it because when they came to this school, they were taught to hold fast to their love of our country, to cherish our heritage, learn from it, and build upon it. That is what young Americans are taught here at West Point. That is the legacy that you carry forward as second lieutenants in the United States Army, and you must never forget it. Through 4 long years, you have honed your skills, trained your mind and body, overcome every obstacle, and earned your place of pride in the long gray line. You made it through the rigors of our day and beast, an intensity of CLDT and weeks of training in the blistering heat. You have pushed yourselves far beyond every limit imaginable. Some of you have even pushed the limits a bit too much. So for any cadets who have not finished walking off their hours, as Commander-in-Chief, I hereby absolve all cadets on restriction for minor conduct offenses, and that is effective immediately. Congratulations. That's a nice one, isn't it? Don't you feel better now?
Stop for a second. I believe, by the way, that is, as a lawyer, he said all cadets. He didn't just say the graduating class. He said all cadets. And so if I'm first, well, you can't have demerits if you're incoming, but if you're a second or third year rising, I think you got the blanket presidential pardon. That's how I read that, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I don't know. He might have meant graduate. He said all cadet. All cadets means all cadets. I think it's all gone. That's my way of reading it. He turned to talk about some of the great leaders who had emerged from West Point. Cut number 10.
We need you to be as bold and determined as the immortal General Douglas MacArthur, who knew that the American soldier never ever quits. After leaving the Philippines for Australia at a low point of the Pacific War in 1942, MacArthur famously vowed, "I shall return." For 2 years, he then took great strategic risks and placed himself often in personal danger. On October 20th, 1944, MacArthur stepped off a landing boat, strode through knee-high water, and proclaimed, "People of the Philippines, I have returned. By the grace of Almighty God, our forces stand again on Philippine soil." He then called upon the island's brave people to rise up and join the fight. America's momentum was unstoppable. These great leaders were not afraid of what others might say about them. They didn't care. They knew their duty was to protect our country. They knew the Army exists to preserve the Republic and the strong foundations upon which it stands: family, God, country, liberty, and justice. They were true, tough American patriots. That is what our country needs, especially in these times. And that is what you are. Each of you begins your career in the Army at a crucial moment in American history. We are restoring the fundamental principles that the job of the American soldier is not to rebuild foreign nations, but defend and defend strongly our nation from foreign enemies.
That point gets elaboration from President Trump in the most policy-specific excerpt of his speech at West Point on Saturday. Cut number 11.
We are ending the era of endless wars. In its place is a renewed, clear-eyed focus on defending America's vital interests. It is not the duty of U.S. troops to solve ancient conflicts in faraway lands that many people have never even heard of. We are not the policemen of the world, but let our enemies be on notice. If our people are threatened, we will never, ever hesitate to act. And when we fight, from now on, we will only fight to win. As MacArthur said, in war, there is no substitute for victory. To ensure you have the very best equipment and technology available, my administration has embarked on a colossal rebuilding of the American armed forces, a record like no other. After years of devastating budget cuts and a military that was totally depleted from these endless wars, we have invested over $2 trillion, that's with a T, dollars, in the most powerful fighting force by far on the planet Earth. We are building new ships, bombers, jet fighters, and helicopters by the hundreds, new tanks, military satellites, rockets, and missiles. even a hypersonic missile that goes 17 times faster than the fastest missile currently available in the world, and can hit a target 1,000 miles away within 14 inches from center point.
That is the game changer, and we are far ahead of the People's Republic of China on it. It's a game changer. We need a lot of them. They're expensive. They ought to be in phase 4 of the rescue package, which will be emerging this summer. One final cut from the president's speech at West Point, cut number 14, where he talks about how West Point and the other service academies, by extension, indeed, every person of the armed services from private to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is necessary to the survival of the country. Cut number 14.
And the survival of our nation still depends on the great chain reaching out from this place, one made not of iron, but of flesh and blood, of memory and spirit, of sheer faith and unyielding courage. Today, each of you becomes another link in that unbroken chain, forged in the crucible known as the United States Military Academy, the greatest on earth. It has given you soldiers that you can rely on to your right and to your left. And now we are entrusting you with the most noble task any warrior has ever had, the privilege to carry out, the task of preserving American liberty. As long as you remain loyal, faithful, and true, then our enemies don't even stand a chance. Our rights will never be stolen. Our freedoms will never be trampled. Our destiny will never be denied. And the United States of America will never be defeated. With the grace of God and the heroes of West Point, America will always prevail. Nothing will stand in your way. Nothing will slow you down. And nothing will stop the West Point class of 2020 from achieving a true and lasting victory. God bless you. God bless the United States Army. And God bless America. Congratulations. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It was one of President Trump's better speeches in the United States. I always think his best three are his speech in Saudi Arabia, his speech in Poland, his speech at Normandy. But I thought it was succinct. In the middle of the chaos of the pandemic, in the middle of the reaction to the death of George Floyd and large demonstrations, I thought he had exactly the right notes about the military. Interesting exchange yesterday. I asked my Baker Mayfield in rather harsh terms. There's two parts of Baker Mayfield I want to talk about. A fan asked him, "Will you be kneeling?" Baker Mayfield responded, "Get your head out." Of course I will be kneeling. Now, the first part of that is objectionable to me. The decision to kneel or not to kneel, that's complicated. I asked 3 uniformed members of the services over on active duty, all of whom have been in combat zones in the last 6 months. They don't object to players kneeling. They believe it is now very specifically directed at racism in law enforcement on the occasions where it occurs. So they don't object. I object to Baker Mayfield telling a fan, "Get your head out," because there are divisions of opinion on this that are legitimate on both sides, and I think professional athletes owe respect to their fan bases. But more on that later. Time to tell you about ReliefFactor.com. Why? Because after the show, back on the road. I'm a little stiff, 8 hours of driving, but, you know, back and forth, back and forth. I get my 4 relief factors and my from my Hillsdale Cup. Little cough there. The lukewarm coffee didn't go down very well, but the Icarian Curcumin Resveratrol and Omega did. I take it every single day at this hour. I tell you about it every single morning, 3 times. Take it in the first hour, remind you 2 more times. Why? If you do like I do and you take it every day for a few months, and I've been doing it for years, you'll get support for the temporary relief of the minor aches and pains. I can't take those things, whatever they're called. I can't take those. So I have to take something that works and Relief Factor does. Salena Zito is next, America. Stay tuned.
Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
By the way, if nobody ends up seriously ill, let alone dead, from all of the rioting and protesting of the last week, will you finally realize that how evil the continuation of lockdown is and the destroying of businesses? The scientists that have led us to this hysteria should have their names implanted in people's minds as destroyers of society. I knew it from the beginning, the hysteria. There's been hysteria over COVID. There's hysteria over police brutality. COVID exists, police brutality exists, but it doesn't mean that the reactions are coherent. So anyway, Biden said in the middle of this address, just happened to catch it, something to the effect, this is the new line. We need to live in America where a black person does not fear that he will be killed that day. Is he speaking about the inner city and killed by a fellow black? No, he's not speaking about that. He's talking about the police. That's the point. There is such a fear in the inner city. Funny, if you talk about where blacks really are suffering, you're a racist. If you talk about blacks where they're really not suffering, where it's minimal, then you're pro-black. Because the issue isn't black-white. The issue is right-left.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
My guest is Jason Riley. He is the board member of the Wall Street Journal, also senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Jason, what do you think are the remaining barriers for people to escape poverty, black people?
The remaining barriers are largely government-created barriers, denying kids the ability to choose the schools they want to attend, or at least their parents choosing the schools that they want their children to attend. When black aspiring entrepreneurs want to start a business in a neighborhood, there are plenty of barriers there. So I think they're largely government barriers. I mean, you mentioned the title of one of my books, Please Stop Helping Us. I don't think there's a government solution out there that's going to save black America. I think it's mostly about black America or about government getting out of the way, minimum wage laws that price blacks out of work and so forth. You know all these arguments, but that's not how the other side measures barriers. They look at disparate outcomes, racially disparate outcomes, and wherever they see them, they assume something nefarious is going on. I read an article in the LA Times recently talking about police. 900 killings in LA by police since 2000, and then they tell you 80% were black. They tell you the percentage of the black population.
America, time for the Yinzer Report with Salena Zito. She who writes for the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Examiner, the New York Post. She's a Energizer bunny of writing. Salena, how are you on this Monday?
Good morning, Sunshine. I'm awesome. How are you?
Terrific. I want to start with sitting down with the Vice President. When did you interview Vice President Pence? What were the circumstances? I have tweeted out the link. What's the most important part of the interview? And by the way, thank you for joining us on Skype. You look terrific. Did you get up and do your hair and all that stuff?
Yeah, but I always do.
Okay,
I
good.
I grew up in the 60s and 70s, so that's what you do. You got up and you kind of look nice for yourself.
Yep.
So he was in Pittsburgh to kick off the American priorities to kick off the Get America Back to Work. So he visited a plant that was kept open during the coronavirus, but he also went and met in the African American community with faith leaders. And that, to me, in the interview, is sort of the most emotional, important part where he talked about what happened to George Floyd, how we go forward with our police departments. And you could tell he got really emotional because I talked to him right after he went to the Covenant Church. That it really impacted him. He was there for a long time. He went there with Pat Toomey. And then he sat with me for about a half hour and just talked about a variety of things. But to me, that and getting America back to work were the really important parts of the interview.
Yeah, I am going to play next hour portions of the Reverend Al Sharpton's eulogy of George Floyd, which I'll bet this audience have not heard before. There's a lot of it I don't like where he condemns the president, but there's a lot that I found typical of the inspiring rhetoric one will find in the African-American church, at least the predominantly African-American congregations of the AME. And is that what the vice president heard? Was that what he was reacting to?
What was really great is the event was a sit down with I think there were 4 African American pastors in and around from southwestern Pennsylvania. It was a real give and take, but he really talked a lot. I mean, he really listened a lot, and there wasn't yelling. But it was very beautiful and it was very powerful. And some of the things they really sort of mourned also were the destruction of African American communities during these riots and protests, and how Antifa has sort of infiltrated their movement and it sort of broke their heart.
Now, Salina, I have to switch quickly to your Wall Street Journal piece on Pennsylvania and voting and to your Examiner column on seniors. Can you summarize both of those? I've tweeted out links to them so people can go and find them and then go to salenazito.com to find all of your writing. But what about those two pieces?
So the senior citizens are going to be the defining vote, the most important voting bloc in the entire 2020. People think it's going to be suburban moms, suburban dads, or NASCAR dads, whatever, people in the street rioting. No, it's going to be the seniors. They show up at 70 percentile rate. They went heavily for Donald Trump in 2020. There's an ABC News poll that shows them moving away from him, but that's only with registered voters, and that was before defund the police. There was a softening. I'm not quite convinced that that Biden has won them back. And the Wall Street Journal piece is about the problem we have in Pennsylvania with our voting system. We just went into mail-in voting, and while the process went really, really well, what didn't go well is the counting. Only one.
Did we lose? You froze there, Salina. What happened to the counting?
Allegheny County got it right. All 66 other counties, not so much. They're still counting in Philadelphia. What that means in November, the potential exists that Pennsylvania might not go until well into a week later. And that's unacceptable, I think, for the country.
How do they change that in time, or can they change that in time? I mean,
Allegheny
that's
County-
rife with the chance for fraud, and Pennsylvania's the whole election.
Pennsylvania is the whole election. And I think they need to invest in high-speed counters in the way that Allegheny County did. And the state did give them state government did give them monies to do that. Unfortunately, a lot of these counties did not invest in them. Allegheny County was done at 2:00 in the morning. As I said, Philadelphia and a handful of the collar counties are still counting by hand.
Wow, that is a terrible. Oh, this election season is going to be terrible if we're waiting for if we're waiting for Pennsylvania for a week. I do think it's coming down to Pennsylvania. Trump, by the way, I think seniors are coming back to Trump. This defund the police and the free state of Seattle. What do you think of the free state of Seattle, Salina?
I think it's awful. I think it's absolutely awful. It's like a mini version of Fort Sumter. You know, they took over their own block of this country. How is this acceptable?
It's not acceptable. It's Biden town. I saw a bunch of Trump people calling it Biden town in Seattle, and I think that's true. That's what you're going to get with Joe Biden if you vote for Joe Biden, is Bidentown in Seattle. SalenaZito.com, SalenaZito.com. Thank you, Salena. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned.
Thank you.
Hey, Salena, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
I didn't hear you before. You okay? Why can't I hear you now? You left me. Wayne. Wayne. Wayne left me.
This is Owen Strand for townhall.com. A call is going out now for the dismantling of the Minneapolis Police Department. The president of the city council said this when asked about what to do in the case of a break-in.
Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors. And I know, and myself too, and I know that that comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more harm is done.
There's no doubt that our cities and communities need restoration, including greater peaceful engagement between police and citizens. Yet the idea that wanting protection is privilege is not sound. In fact, it's absurd and won't restore anything. Police who act unjustly are accountable to the rule of law and must be. But there is no need to qualify what a society without police will look like. More harm will surely be done. May coming days bring greater safety and meaningful restoration. I'm Owen Strand.
ADF, fighting for those whose religious freedom is being violated. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
By the way, if nobody ends up seriously ill, let alone dead, from all of the rioting and protesting of the last week, will you finally realize that how evil the continuation of lockdown is and the destroying of businesses? The scientists that have led us to this hysteria should have their names implanted in people's minds as destroyers of society. I knew it from the beginning. The hysteria. There's been hysteria over COVID.
The Minneapolis
There's hysteria over police brutality. COVID exists, police brutality exists, but it doesn't mean that the reactions are coherent. So anyway, Biden said in the middle of this address, just happened to catch it, something to the effect, this is the new line. We need to live in America where a black person does not fear that he will be killed that day. Is he speaking about the inner city and killed by a fellow black? No, he's not speaking about that. He's talking about the police. That's the point. There is such a fear in the inner city. Funny, if you talk about where blacks really are suffering, you're a racist. If you talk about blacks where they're really not suffering, where it's minimal, then you're pro-black. Because the issue isn't black-white. The issue is right-left.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
My guest is Jason Riley. He is the board member of the Wall Street Journal, also senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Jason, what do you think are the remaining barriers for people to escape poverty, Black people?
The remaining barriers are largely government-created barriers, denying kids the ability to choose the schools they want to attend, or at least their parents choosing the schools that they want their children to attend. When Black aspiring entrepreneurs want to start a business in a neighborhood, there are plenty of barriers there. So I think they're largely government barriers. I mean, you mentioned the title of one of my books, Please Stop Helping Us. I don't think there's a government solution out there that's going to save Black America. I think it's mostly about Black America or about government getting out of the way, minimum wage laws that price Blacks out of work and so forth. You know all these arguments, but that's not how the other side measures barriers. They look at disparate outcomes, racially disparate outcomes, and wherever they see them, they assume something nefarious is going on. I read an article in the L.A. Times recently talking about police. 900 killings in L.A. by police since 2000, and then they tell you 80% were Black. They tell you the percentage of the Black population in L.A., and they go, draw your own conclusions. When we know, it's not that simple. Just telling us what the percentage of the population is, and then the percentage of Blacks involved with police. What we want to know, what are the crime rates based on neighborhoods and zip codes and race and ethnicity and so forth. You must factor that in.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
This is the state of play. And what is the response from the left? Mr. Mayor, please listen to Governor Jay Inslee of Washington State, where some of the worst violence is occurring, on his responsibility or lack thereof to the people of his state.
Thing called the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. What's your thought on that? The fact that the protesters have taken that over and not allowing people to come and go freely? Regarding the National Guard.
Well, that's news to me, so I'll have to reserve any comment about it. I have not heard anything about that from any credible source. Not that you're not credible. It's just like before I espouse an opinion, I should know of which I speak.
Should a governor be laughing about losing control of the streets of one of his cities, Mr. Matt?
I'm not surprised, Sebastian. Are you?
I'm not, but what does this mean for the people living in Seattle in Washington State?
Well, I hope that the American people can observe all this and they can see there's no coincidence that the worst riots, the most destruction, the most loss of human life and property occurred in cities and states governed by Democrats. It didn't happen in cities governed by Republicans. And riots didn't happen in my city until it got a Democratic mayor again. The last riot was under a Democratic mayor. I avoided them for 8 years, and Bloomberg did it for 12. And it's not hard to do it if you activate the police to get them to stop it. These people, I don't know what has happened to them. They almost seem like anarchists rather than members of a responsible political party.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Glory, America, on Monday, June 15th. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for listening. Bonjour, hi to my friends in Canada and everyone listening in Europe, 300 affiliates. I hope you're watching on YouTube as well. We have a live feed over there and on Instagram and, of course, over at the Universe, where every minute of every show is available if you become a Universe subscriber, including the after show where Dwayne returns at 8 p.m. in the East, 5 p.m. in the West to tell you what happened during the day, because we want to make sure it's a full service array, a full spectrum of news. What I did this weekend, which you probably did not do, is listen to Al Sharpton's eulogy of George Floyd in Houston. Now, I've known the Reverend Al since 1992. He first appeared in my studios when I was the co-host of Life and Times for PBS in L.A. in 1992 during the L.A. riots. I talked to him then. He didn't come on the show. But I've been his guest many, many times. And I know that many of you don't like the Reverend Al because of early radical activity and protests. Crown Heights, I know about Tawana Brawley. I know about that. I think Al Sharpton changed. I think he has become more responsible but remains quite radical. And in the eulogy, there are parts which I'm not going to play for you in which he attacks President Trump in, I believe, unfair terms. But there are parts I found quite inspiring. And I don't think most of my audience will have heard this approach to the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. That's what I've always called it from the day I saw it, because 8 minutes and 46 seconds is a premeditated act. And I think every police officer who's called this show has said unacceptable, man ought to be charged with murder. And so I have no doubt about that. But I want you to be able to get a sense of how the African-American community views the murder of George Floyd. And I think Al Sharpton did a very good job in 3/4 of his eulogy, where he wasn't political, in talking about that. Here's cut number 1. I want to assure you, Al Sharpton and I read the same book. Cut number 1.
Want you to turn briefly to the book of Ephesians, 6th chapter. Ephesians is 6th chapter, because I think that we need to understand what we're dealing with here. Ephesians 6 chapter, it tells the story of why I think we need to really look at the situation differently. Because it talks about, in Paul's letter to the Ephesians, okay, I'm catching up with myself. It says in his letter to the Ephesians, he says, finally be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers and authorities, against the powers of the darkness, against spiritual forces of wickedness in high places. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so when the day of evil comes, ye may be able to withstand your ground. May God add a blessing to the reading of his word.
All right, stop right there. Now, I am quite certain that if you are a Christian of any denomination, I don't care where you are on the spectrum, you've heard that before. You've heard Ephesians before. And by the way, whether or not it's I wouldn't have any idea where it is, because I'm Catholic and we know everything that's in the Bible, we just can't find it. That is just gospel truth. And I've spent 30 years also going to the Presbyterian church. I'm starting to get the arrangement down. But when you grow up in the Catholic church, you just know it all, because you hear it all every 3 years at Mass, which you're obliged to attend in little bits, and it's mixed up. And you don't really get, you don't get that. But here is Al Sharpton preaching from Ephesians to put on the whole armor of God. And that is very familiar. Would you have imagined, did you know that he preached a eulogy out of Ephesians? He also gave you a little biography about Al Sharpton, which I did not know, and I've known Al for 28 years. Met him in 1992. I did not know this.
He said, what do you mean? I said, about 8-9 years ago, newspaper in New York did a background on my family. And they found out, Dr. Wright, that my great-grandfather was a slave in Ellenville, South Carolina. I went down there with the newspaper and other press, and we went to the graveyard And my great-grandfather was owned by the family of Strom Thurmond, the segregationists. And I went to the white church, the First Baptist Church, and in the graveyard there was the tombstones. And the whole I'd say about a quarter of the cemetery, the tombstones, Ben Crump, was Thurmands and Sharptons. And I said, well, you mean all of these? They said, wait a minute, the plantation your great-grandfather was about a mile away. They buried the slaves there. They only put pebbles over their graves. So it occurred to me that every time I write my name, sir, that is not my name. That's the name of who owned my great-grandfather. That's how deep race is, that every time I write my name, I'm writing American history of what happened to my people. I can't talk about what my great-grandparents did. They were enslaved, and we're still being treated less than others. And until America comes to terms with what it has done and what it did, we will not be able to heal because you are not recognizing the wound.
Now, Al, I did not know that, also went on to speak about being on food stamps at the end. I knew he was a preacher from the age of 6. In the Pentecostal tradition, he's been rebaptized as a Baptist. But he was very biblical in his eulogy and about what the movements meant. And I want you to hear this as well, talking about what he interpreted the protest as. Next cut, please.
Not anything. Because somewhere I read in the Bible that God said he would pour out his spirit among all flesh. And not anything. Because somewhere I read in the Bible that God said he would pour out his spirit among all flesh. And that's why when I heard them talking about, they never thought they'd see young whites marching like they marching now. All over the world, I've seen grandchildren of slave masters tearing down slave master statue over in England and put it in the river. I'll pour out my spirit among all flesh. I've seen whites walking past curfews saying no Black Lives Matter, no justice, no peace. I'll pour out my spirit among all flesh. You have now lived to where you've sown wickedness. And now you have to reap the wrath of those that don't want to be wicked no more. That a man sows, that shall he also reap. So we come because God, in his own way, he always, one of the ministers said it right, God always uses unlikely people to do his will. If George Floyd had been an Ivy League school graduate and one of these ones with a long title, we would have been accused of reacting to his prominence. If he'd been a multimillionaire, they would have said that we were reacting to his wealth. If he had been famous athlete, as he was on the trajectory to be, we would have said we were reacting to his fame. But God took an ordinary brother from the third ward, from the housing projects, that nobody thought much about but those that knew him and loved him. He took the rejected stone, the stone that the builder rejected. They rejected him for jobs. They rejected him for positions. They rejected him to play certain teams. God took the...
I'm going to play a little bit more of this because the Good Samaritan makes an appearance too in Al Sharpton's eulogy for George Floyd. I don't think anyone in my audience has heard this. I want you to hear this. It's the argument from Scripture with which I agree that racism is sin and cannot be abided. It's that simple. Cannot be tolerated. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
For folks like you and me, this was a moment ago, especially for you. You lived through this. You were an adult. This was your friend. This was a student. And the parallels with what are happening in this country today are so striking. I mean, we could have talked about this book just because it's the 50th anniversary and it's a good book and it's interesting. And, you know, you and I have met. But I mean, the parallels to what is happening right now in this country are just crazy similar. And so I do want to talk about that. Now, look, there's a lot of young people listening to this program who don't have a clue what was going on around that time. So frame it for us. In this novel, Hippies, which is based on real life events, obviously, you just told us two of your friends were killed. Students were killed. I mean, I still can't get my head around this.
All right. It was.
No, go ahead. So frame it for people who don't know anything about Kent State or whatever.
Right. Well, back then in 1969, 1970, it was all about the Vietnam War, and the attitude of the country was changing. Like our bus baby boomers, when we were going off, we're graduating. Like when I was graduating from high school in '67, you were expected to go to Vietnam and defend the country, like our parents did, the World War II generation, and we were all for it. But then people started realizing this war was not a good war. There was no sense to it. The kids were getting killed at the same rate as World War II, and nothing was happening. I mean, Vietnam was no threat to the United States. Like the
Testing 1 2 1 2.
You know, Vietnam didn't even
I'm hearing myself coming into the TriCaster.
They went to Vietnam and they came back and telling horror stories.
Now
So the whole mood of the country was
myself
changing.
in the TriCaster. Mute.
The students started protesting.
Mute input 2, Ben.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Mayor Jenny Durkin appeared with Chris Cuomo on CNN and characterized this takeover of a neighborhood in Seattle where you just heard the police chief characterize people pelting police officers with projectiles, screaming at them, attacking, and ultimately taking it over. But the mayor says these patriots are sort of just having a giant, fun-filled block party.
So I don't have to tell you about the situation on the ground in your city, but in terms of how it looks to the rest of the country and the president teeing it up as basically ineptitude, the inability to control your own streets. Is that fair criticism?
So I know it will shock you that the president is perhaps not giving an accurate or truthful picture. We've got 4 blocks in Seattle that you just saw pictures of that is more like a block party atmosphere. It's not an armed takeover. It's not a military junta. We will make sure that we can restore this, but we have block parties and the like in this part of Seattle all the time. It's known for that. So I think the president, number one, there is no threat right now to the public, and we're taking that very seriously. We're meeting with businesses and residents. But what the president threatened is illegal and unconstitutional. And the fact that he can think he can just tweet that and not have ramifications is just wrong.
I don't even know where to begin.
America has been doing some soul searching lately. Perhaps you noticed. We're examining what's right with America and what can be made better. No other country does this kind of introspection better than us. Some of what we found we don't like and will change. Every life has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. That includes our law enforcement as well as every skin color. We've been through this before in America, and we always came out stronger. We will this time too. Our hosts will make sure of that. We are the answer.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt on a Monday, June 15th in the year of the plague, 2020. I've been playing for you some excerpts of Al Sharpton's eulogy at George Floyd's Houston funeral. I listened to it twice, every word. There's a lot I do not like, but there's a lot I actually found inspiring. And I thought that Al Sharpton preached on a part of the gospel that is really useful for America right now. Let's play those few minutes.
Let me tell you this. Jesus told the story that there was a man laying by the side of the road. He'd been robbed and beaten. They said one man came by that was his same race, his fellow brother, and he kept walking. Then another man came by that was steeped and well read in the scriptures, knew every scripture, knew how to quote the book back and forward, but he only quoted the book. He never lived by the book, and he kept walking. But Jesus said a third man came by, and he stopped and looked at the man. He wasn't the same race, wasn't the same religion, but he picked the man up. And he took care of restoring the man to his rightful being. And Jesus called him the Good Samaritan. The problem is too many of you been walking by the Eric Gardners, been walking by the Trayvon Martins, been walking by the Aubreys, been walking by, and now we stopped for George Floyd. And I'm in Houston today because I don't want nobody to call me a passerby. Jamie here because he's not a passerby. All of you are here because we not passerbys. And we're going to be back in Minneapolis when the trials start. Because you may pack the police union on one side, but the righteous is going to be on the other side of that courtroom.
Now, it actually crescendos from there, and all I can tell you is watch the whole thing. You will not like what he says about President Trump. I reject it totally. But that's a challenge, I think, ought to resonate with people. Are you a passerby? You can't be a passerby. Now, how do you not pass by the right way? You can pass by in a lot of different ways, and you can help in a lot of, and you can also screw the matter completely up by involving yourself in the wrong way. I have always believed, and we live this, that the most effective intervention for any part of America that is left behind is education and the church. So I believe you always ought to be supporting an urban church. By that I mean a church that is almost overwhelmingly serving people of color and people of underprivileged economic circumstance. And by underprivileged, that's a loaded term now. Poor people. A church that takes care of the poorest of the poor. I think you ought to be doing that. And I also think you ought to be investing in education. And I really believe that if we want to solve the problems of the underclass in America, red, white, black, brown, you've got to address education. And you cannot allow the schools that have failed for 30 years to continue to fail another generation. And when I look at Seattle, I see a failed school system. When I look at most of the critiques of America, I see people who do not know anything about Lincoln, about the war between good and evil that was the Civil War. I don't see anyone who understands the founding. I don't see anyone who understands anything about the World War II. I don't see any history. I don't see Constitution. I see nothing except ignorance. And I look at our primary and secondary schools and I say, what the heck happened here? Because you cannot rebuild the underclass, the disinherited. You can, if you don't want to be a passerby, work on education. I'd love to talk to Al about this, and I will at some point. After the break, I'll talk to you, 1-800-520-1234. 1-800-520-1234. What do you make of Al Sharpton and his eulogy? 1-800-520-1234, connection to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
fine, but you should have told me you were doing that.
Attention business owners. As America gets back to work, will customers know you're there? With little warning, the coronavirus attacked our nation and our well-being in ways we never anticipated. The tragic loss of life, unprecedented economic upheaval, and a shattered sense of security has left many individuals and businesses in shambles. While the aftershocks could be felt for months to come, they may not have to. There is hope for an extraordinary turnaround of your bottom line. But will you be prepared for America's grand reopening? All signs point to the biggest business opportunity of our lifetime, coming as early as this summer. A recent survey of local advertisers shows a 10-point jump in the number of local advertisers who plan to maintain or increase their spending. 1 in 4 businesses expect to spend more in advertising by the end of June, and more than half expect to restart
Huh?
spending by this summer.
Wait, now I'm hearing myself.
Increased spending from advertisers across
Okay,
the country.
that works. I can hear myself on the... me as the second Skype call, I can hear myself.
Salem Surround is prepared to help you deliver the right advertising message to reach all potential customers wherever they are. Your business can be ready for a post-COVID-19 economy, but the time to act is now. Be at the
Myself.
front of the line.
Now I am.
The economy begins to fire on all cylinders once again. For a free assessment of your marketing message and strategy, visit salemsurround.com or contact your local media strategist today.
Trending now on the Larry Elder Show.
Heard somebody the other day say,
Okay,
Drew Brees
now,
made a gutsy statement in favor of the flag, the American flag. Really?
Okay, testing. 1, 2, 1, 2. Now turn on the mic. On 2.
And I said to myself, well, that's Drew Brees. He's always been a class act.
1, 2. No, I'm not hearing myself downstream.
And he doesn't agree with this
Correct. Why is
kneeling
this not working?
and said so. Now, why that is some sort of great act of courage says a whole lot about where we are in our society.
Okay, something has changed in this
And then something else happened. You know what that something else is?
Okay, go ahead and put everything back. I'll try to find something.
I should have known more. I didn't realize. Have a much greater understanding now. What is going on? This is the opposite of the racism that the people seem to think exists in this country. Zero tolerance. I will never agree with anybody disrespecting the flag of the United States of America or our country. Let me just tell you what I see or what I feel when the national anthem is played and when I look at the flag of the United States. End of quote. That's how I feel. I'm supposed to apologize for that? Did he make demands that his teammates not kneel? No. Did he call out any of his teammates for kneeling by name? No. I disagree with it, and therefore I've got to apologize.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
Exclusive from General Flynn. This is at westernjournal.com. Freedom is oxygen, like the air we breathe that keeps our lungs full and our hearts beating. The celestial feeling of freedom brings a sense of peace to our souls. Freedom must never be taken for granted. Securing our freedom demands a high price, and that price requires hard work and sacrifice. Both will bind us all by the value they produce, but only if we are willing to seek new opportunities and new ideas. Those who have sacrificed the most, those who have given the last true measure of devotion that derives from the love of faith, family, and the cause of freedom, for all of us to be free and for the betterment of our republic and the free world, cannot be allowed to have died in vain. Theirs is the ultimate sacrifice, and heaven is their reward. Our future, the future of our children and grandchildren, and the future of our country are at stake. God will not give way to the care of the devil or allow us to be left to the evil vices of those who would steal our freedom in the dark of night. He will not. Instead, God will stand with us as he always does. Hard work and personal sacrifice still very much matter. Being a good person and showing kindness to others still matter.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt, 1-800-520-1234. I want to thank my two new sponsors, Heritage Foundation. Tomorrow is the Hugh for Heritage Hour in the third hour on Tuesday. Don't miss that. If you want substance to go with your radio, I mean, if you really want to know what's going on in the country, 3 different guests join me, and every week we update HughForHeritage.com. There'll be a new link, a new article, a new free look at what's going on inside of America's most influential leading conservative think tank, HughForHeritage.com. Don't miss that. And also, please go get the facts about coronavirus. Go to flattenthefear.com. That's brought to you by another sponsor of the program, JobCreatorsNetwork.com. And they are working very hard to assist everyone in the reopening of America. And JobCreatorsNetwork.com can only work if you help them, flattenthecurve.com. Now, as I walked around last night, as I said, I went to dinner with the senior member of the Trump administration. We talked through everything that's going on in America, everything that's going on in the world, and the necessity of a second Trump term. Because a lot of what he was sort of denied a first term because of this Russian nonsense. The attempted coup by Comey and McCabe and a handful of others really screwed up the first term. So Trump got going basic, and then the whole impeachment charade. It's all just a giant charade. And they did screw up the first term, but they didn't stop the economic growth. And if you vote for the president, you're voting for the Constitution, a military rebuild, and economic growth. If you vote for Biden, you're voting for bureaucrats. That's what you're doing. You're voting for bureaucrats, you're voting for appeasement, and you're voting for economic entropy. It is a very, very, very obvious choice. And I believe it's going to grow more obvious. And I hope a whole bunch of people are looking at Seattle and saying, that is not what I want for this country. And that is the Biden town up there in Seattle. I don't know what they're calling it this week. They changed the name of it. It's just Biden town. There'll be Biden towns all over the place because the hard left has taken over the Democratic Party. Joe Biden is a front man. He is not in control of that party. He lucked into the nomination because of Bernie, because of a whole bunch of different circumstances. He is not the party. AOC is the party. AOC is the party. To the phones, Catherine in San Antonio, listening on K-Loop. Good morning, Catherine. 1-800-520-1234. JD and Bill, I got to say, sorry, I'm not going to talk to you this morning. I'm going to limit it to first-time callers. Catherine, go ahead.
Hi, Hugh. Listen, I've had an idea for a long time. I am a lover of people. I don't care what color they are or anything else. If they want to love me, I love them. And there's 2 people down at the grocery store of color, a tall man and a shorter woman, and I don't hug the man, but I hug the woman, and she hugs me, and we like each other. And I'm thinking if we could get some people together, not the radicals, but some people that are just in the middle. We all have a little prejudice. I know they do, and I do. You know, I'm 80 years old, and I have a little prejudice. But if we could get a bunch together, I don't know what we could call it. But do you have any good? Does that sound like the?
Well, I want to ask you, do you go to church, Catherine?
Oh, absolutely. I am very much a Christian.
Is your church multiracial?
Unfortunately, Yes, we have one. Yeah, but not very much.
Not very much, right? It's the most segregated hour in America because most congregations are black or white or Latino. The Catholic Church is the most integrated church I know, by the way. That's just repeatedly is true.
I think so, yeah.
But I would recommend that you go to your church and you say, we need to partner with a black church or a Latino church or both, and we need to not only exchange in services, we need to know that church and help that church. That's what I would recommend.
Well, okay, thank you so much. I'm not going to do mine because they're all Democrats.
Well, they'd like it then, Catherine. They might be all Democrats, and they'd like your idea. They'd be stunned, a Republican amidst them. Thank you, dear. Thanks for calling. Brian in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Hi, Brian. You're on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Hi, Hugh. Jesus is my Lord and Savior. I'm a Christian. I'm also a teacher. I'm also married to an African-American woman. I have 2 children. They're biracial. Hugh, in my opinion, the racial reconciliation, the racial coming together, it has to take place in the church first and foremost. There's no way, my brother, that Jesus is okay with Christians being separated based upon the color of their skin. You know that, and I know that.
Of course.
That's not condemnation. That's reality.
Of course.
So the way forward is not throwing money at the black churches.
No, you did. Did you just hear me talk to Catherine?
No, I did. But the temptation is to say, well, we'll simply give them money. The reality is we need to invest in people through deep relationships, and that's the hard part.
Yes.
That's the hard part. But that's the hard part Jesus is calling us to. Mel Blount, you know who Mel Blount is, don't you?
You bet. Unfortunately, played for the wrong team, but yes.
I got you. He said over the weekend in Pittsburgh, he said, we need to get comfortable with the uncomfortable conversations of race. And he's a wonderful Christian brother, awesome NFL Hall of Famer. And that's what I'm saying.
Just on the wrong team. But Brian, my point is that it is the most segregated hour in America, right? The hour that you're in church. So if you take an overwhelmingly Anglo congregation and you match them up with an overwhelmingly Latino or black congregation, and you say we're doing stuff together, not just money, although there might be some financials, but not just money. Heck, some of my favorite AME churches are in pretty good shape financially compared to the little tiny Baptist church out there that's falling apart. I think that's the way forward. I do. Along with some public policy changes that I've mentioned, but I think it starts with the church.
Absolutely. And I think President Trump, the guy who just does not follow the traditional methods, he has a real opportunity, Hugh. He's an out-of-the-box thinker to really hit this issue in an unconventional way. You have the ear of the administration. The race problem is just as important as the China problem, maybe more important for this country. And that can evolve into national security stability when
Brian,
with our brothers and sisters in America.
When Secretary Clinton was on this show, she said, we can hold 2 thoughts at one time. Dealing with race in America does not mean we cannot deal with the fact that the Chinese Communist Party wants to dominate the world. We can do both.
Agreed. Absolutely. I'm with you.
Where do you worship?
I worship at a church in Pittsburgh. It is a deliberately multiracial, multicultural church. It is called Eastminster Church in East Liberty in Pittsburgh. We've got to be deliberate about this. It is a spiritual battle, as Al Sharpton was articulating. He did wonderfully. We deal not with flesh and blood. Racism is satanic. The Ku Klux Klan is the equivalent of ISIS in our country. And, that's just reality. And we need to see it as...
What did you think about... Have you listened to his eulogy yet?
You played it.
It's 48 minutes long. I can't play the whole thing. I just picked a few spots. What did you think of that?
Hugh, it was inspiring. And I know Al is very much held in derision by a lot of conservatives. But you know and I know, Hugh, Jesus has chosen what the world sees, what we may see as the ragtags, to to proclaim his gospel. I'm a ragtag to some people. I'm a fool to some people. I'm not the stellar privileged person. I am very imperfect. Al Sharpton is very imperfect. He also happens to be our brother in Christ. And let the conservative white brothers and sisters who are listening, who God loves, and I appreciate them, let them take a fresh look at Al Sharpton, is what I have to say. A fresh look at Jesus, most of all. Thanks, Hugh.
Thank you, Brian. Let me go to Woody in Texas. Hey, Woody, you're on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning. I'll tell you how I appreciate you playing the Al Sharpton thing, but I want to make a call for righteousness, that the whole idea of the passerbys, the man, the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan, dealt with the other man in a righteous manner. The thing is, we're not seeing righteousness being played out in our situation today. Not only do black lives matter, but blue lives matter, and the lives of the unborn matter. And this is all a matter of righteousness. We live in a land that is ruled by righteousness, a nation of laws. And so I want to place a call for my brothers and sisters to stand for righteousness.
Woody, thank you. Look, I'm not preaching. This is a secular show. I just think if people are serious, that part that Al talked about, I've never been a passerby. Heck, I dive into every argument. And I'm usually right, but sometimes I'm wrong. And I do not hold people's past against them, because that is not how I approach life. It's not consistent with my faith. But I do believe that everyone ought to go look it up. You're going to be mad at Al when he goes after Trump. And I didn't play that part because what a surprise. Al doesn't like Donald Trump and thinks he's part of the problem. I don't think this has anything to do with Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump's economy was the best thing to happen to America in 50 years on the race relation. And then the flu, not the Wu flu, but the virus comes from China, destroys our economy. Trump would have won 45 states. I don't know if he's going to win. I think he's going to win re-election. But the racial reconciliation begins with a job and with opportunity and with people not passing by inequality. And I believe that starts with the church. Maggie in Pittsburgh, you got 30 seconds, Maggie. Maggie, go ahead, Maggie.
Hey, Maggie in Pittsburgh. I listened to Al Sharpton's funeral.
You got to be quick, Maggie. We got 30 seconds. Quick, to the point.
I think it's caused more division. I sell houses to police officers.
All right, Maggie, thank you. You didn't like it? Got it? I got to go to my relieffactor.com. That's the problem with Radio America. When I give you 30 seconds, I mean it. Relieffactor.com is the sponsor of this studio, and it's the sponsor of how I get out and run after the show. And I want you to remember to take it today before you leave. I want you to get out there and go and exercise. I read the most interesting thing yesterday, that you can be 50s, you can be in your 60s, you can be in your 70s, and you've got to move, and you've got to lift weights, and you've got to stay active if you want to be in your 90s and your 100s, which is perfectly possible. Perfectly possible. If you just do the movement, just do the repetitions. You do not have to do powerlifting. You do not have to get out in a skull. You do not have to run a marathon, but you do have to move. And that means relieffactor.com, $19.95, 4 natural supplements that support the temporary relief of the minor aches and pains that come with that kind of a regimen in your private life. So please, $19.95. Get started, try it for 3 weeks, and then tell me yay or nay. Most of you always say, I'm going to keep doing that. You are. Don't forget as well, Honor Bound Coffee. Honor Bound Coffee, Honor Bound Coffee. Make every cup of coffee count. All right? Every cup of coffee. If you get it from Honor Bound Coffee, the profit from that coffee goes to support the men and women in the American military. Every single sip of coffee. So go subscribe to Honor Bound Coffee and come right back. I've got one of the great, Chuck Rosenberg joins me, one of the MSNBC people that you'll like. He knows what he's talking about. Stay tuned.
This is Owen Strand for townhall.com.
A call is going out now for the dismantling of the Minneapolis Police Department. The president of the city council said this when asked about what to do in the case of a break-in.
Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors. And I know, and myself too, and I know that that comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more harm is done.
There's no doubt that our cities and communities need restoration, including greater peaceful engagement between police and citizens. Yet the idea that wanting protection is privilege is not sound. In fact, it's absurd and won't restore anything. Police who act unjustly are accountable to the rule of law and must be. But there is no need to qualify what a society without police will look like. More harm will surely be done. May coming days bring greater safety and meaningful restoration. I'm Owen Strand.
ADF, fighting for those whose religious freedom is trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
Hey, folks, welcome back. I'm talking to Charlie Kirk. Charlie, one of the most disturbing things I've seen recently is some of these activists who are clearly bullies. I mean, there's a violence. You can feel it, that they're very angry and they're approaching strangers on the street and demanding that these strangers take a knee, or that the cops take a knee. And I just think I've never seen anything so ugly that cops are being yelled at to take a knee. I mean, they should say, well, I'll take a knee if you take a knee for Jesus Christ. You go first.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal point, and I'm going to use it, which is, these are people that won't kneel for God, but they'll kneel because of some sort of pre-described class guilt. And so this is a really important point, Eric, which is this whole idea of white privilege is a racist and sinister lie that is taught to our kids from a very, very young age. And I find the whole idea morally reprehensible, that your identity, your skin color, that's not even your identity, by the way, that's just your appearance. Let's just make that very clear. That identity actually can mean a lot more. It could be your thoughts, your feelings, your worldview. And actually what has made the West so different, which was an idea that Jesus talked about, and people don't recognize this, is that equality under the law was nowhere to be seen. I mean, the Roman Republic paled in comparison to the Christian ethic. When Christ said, no, you're all equal under the eyes of God. We just forget, we just throw that all out in our society. That's why Trump holding up that Bible was so significant.
Yep. Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. America has been doing some soul searching lately. Perhaps you noticed. We're examining what's right with America and what can be made better. No other country does this kind of introspection better than us. Some of what we found we don't like and will change. Every life has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. That includes our law enforcement as well as every skin color. We'll make sure of that. We are the answer.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt, joined now by Chuck Rosenberg, who you often see on MSNBC. I met Chuck at the Aspen Defense Forum, I guess 2 years ago, and had a wonderful conversation with him. I'm always impressed when I see him on MSNBC, though I rarely agree with him. Good morning, Chuck. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Hugh. Nice to be with you.
Chuck, tell our audience, please, just to remind them, your background. You've got amazing credentials as a prosecutor. I just want them to be reminded of that.
Oh, thanks for that. I'm not sure how amazing they are, but I've been doing it for a while. I spent a lot of time as an assistant U.S. attorney, Hugh, a line prosecutor. I worked for Bob Mueller at the FBI. I worked for John Ashcroft when he was attorney general. I was appointed by President Bush to be the U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. Went back to the FBI as Jim Comey's chief of staff, and later served as the head of the DEA under President Obama. So a political appointee both under the second President Bush and under President Obama.
So when I tell people I was at the Department of Justice, I was there for a year. How long were you there for, Chuck?
Oh, more than 20,
yeah.
But in various jobs.
All right, now I have a couple of questions for you. First of all, you've started a podcast, which I look for. I didn't know that until yesterday. The Oath. When did you start that? What is it all about?
Yeah, we started it in March of last year. So we're in our third season now. And the whole idea was to try and stay away from current events and politics. I mean, we're not perfect at that, but we're pretty good at just avoiding current events and politics and trying to have long form, serious conversations with really thoughtful people. It's about second chances, about humility, about mentors, about sacrifice and struggle. We've had Bill McRaven on and Jim Stavridis. Fiona Hill is coming up this season. Week after next will be Kathy Sullivan, the first American woman to walk in space. So just trying to talk to a broad array of people who have served the public and who have taken the oath.
Now, Chuck, I really don't like you coming into my world. I mean, this is what I've been doing for 30 years, and I don't need the competition. Actually, I'm glad you were doing it. And I believe there's a hunger in America for that. And it's not really what television is about. Agree or disagree?
Oh, look, you said earlier that we would disagree on a lot of things, Hugh. I'm actually not sure that's true. I mean, I think you're exactly right. The feedback we get from our listeners is thank you for having a civil conversation with interesting people and sort of avoiding the hysteria on the left and the right. I think most people, I think I'm one of them, exist somewhere in the middle. Sometimes I'm slightly left of center and sometimes I'm probably slightly right of center, but I've spent most of my life in the middle. And sometimes it feels kind of lonely there.
I also like your Just the Facts, ma'am approach on TV. Now I want to go to Just the Facts. In your life as an AUSA and in your life as United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, did you ever see guilty pleas withdrawn?
Never. I have seen one or two people try to withdraw a guilty plea, but the burden for doing that is pretty high. And at least in the Eastern District of Virginia, once you tell a federal judge under oath that you're guilty, that you in fact did what you were charged with, they're pretty reluctant to let you out.
Does it happen to your knowledge anywhere in the United States?
Yeah, the anywhere question is a hard one, Hugh. I think so. I imagine it did. There's a rule that permits it. So almost everything has happened somewhere, but I have not seen it.
Yeah, my research into Justia tells me it is not common. It's very infrequent, but it does happen, and it's not rare. That usually upon the presentation of new evidence or upon a motion of ill-equipped counsel. And
yeah,
that's
right.
That's
and look, if you had bad counsel, you'd want someone to have good counsel and let them out and let them, sort of relitigate it. Or if you had new evidence that established that someone who you thought did it didn't do it, you'd want them to be let out of it. That makes sense to me. There is an interest of justice standard behind the rule. And so if it's in the interest of justice for someone to, undo what they did, sure. But I haven't really seen it in my own practice.
In your own practice, did you ever make a motion to dismiss a case under Rule 48?
No.
Again, are you aware of it happening other places? Because my research, I've never been a prosecutor, so this is all news to me. I'm a civil lawyer. I've retired from the active practice of law. But did you ever see anyone or do you know of other people making Rule 48 motions?
Sure. So, and I should be a little more sort of layered here. We've dismissed indictments. We've dismissed counts within an indictment. That all happens as part of a plea negotiation. So, Hugh Hewitt has committed, let's say, 10 counts of bank fraud and pleads guilty to one, and we get rid of the other 9 as part of a plea agreement. I don't think you're talking about that, though.
No, I'm talking about Judge Sullivan, and now we're running out of time. I have to have you back next week. But, Chuck, have you ever seen a judge invite an amicus in when both prosecution and defense want to withdraw a guilty plea and DOJ moves that it be dismissed?
No, Hugh, I've not. That's a very unusual posture, and it raises a whole bunch of questions. I'm not really very comfortable with what I'm seeing in the district court for the District of Columbia on a lot of levels. I mean, it may surprise you to know that I think Judge Sullivan mishandled the case early on. This case in the Eastern District of Virginia would have been resolved and sentenced in 2018. And so the delay upon delay upon delay has brought us into the situation we're in now. I have very strong views about what General Flynn did and what ought to happen, but that's another matter.
Come back next week, Chuck Rosenberg, because I want to hear that. Meanwhile, I will go to The Oath on Apple Podcasts and give it a listen. Chuck Rosenberg is really one of the very balanced views out there, and I think you're going to enjoy his podcast. Ben Carson is next, America. Stay tuned.
Hey, Chuck, thank you very much for doing that.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, we'll try and do it again next week.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
If you actually care about Black lives, you have an obligation to distance yourself from Black Lives Matter, the organization, the hashtag movement, whatever it is. I want to get that out up front. But Horace, how have you been processing this?
So our group, Project 21, was actually formed in the wake of the Rodney King riots. And several of us, I'm a founding member of the organization, but several of us were watching CNN and hearing this idea that it is the normal and legitimate way that Black Americans express their frustrations with civic life, that they run into the nearest Best Buy and grab as many DVD players as they can. And we knew, I knew this, my associates that I grew up with, and it turns out people from all walks of life knew that this is so far from reality. And we decided to form an organization that would say, we're Black Americans, and we want people to understand that this universal vision or perspective that's being put forward on the mainstream media about who Black Americans are doesn't represent or reflect the reality. And we are going to start having people that will appear on the news, appear in print, appear on the radio waves saying, hey, wait a second, there's a different perspective. When Martin Luther King said that people would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, we were astonished to hear that what people were saying is okay to say.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
And I can hear myself. Okay, that's it. Testing. 1 2 1 2 1 2.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
I want to share with you Raynor Jackson's comments because this came from the White House.
Testing 1 2 1 2.
Where
is it still going in the air?
The president is sort of, in his way, on a listening tour.
It's not going over the air.
You know, I know that the rap against
look at the
Donald
master
Trump
level.
is that he doesn't listen.
That's your video up there.
Anybody?
Testing 1 2 1
and that,
2.
of course, is a lot of hogwash. He does listen. He ultimately makes decisions based on his gut, on his instinct.
I'll pause it and I'll talk. It'll still go.
Testing.
Look, you can hear us right now from the other room.
So go back to Mixer.
On what got him to the White House in the first place.
Okay.
But quite frankly, anybody who's been around him recognizes he does spend a lot of time listening to advisors. Listening to people who are willing to bend his ear. So here's Raynor Jackson.
But what I'd like to say to you, Mr. President, is kind of off the beaten path. I'd like to say to all the media assembled here that I wish they would quit lying about what you've done specifically for the Black community. So you got radical liberal journalists like Joy Reid from MSNBC, Don Lemon from CNN, Roland Martin, who are putting more poison into the Black community than any drug dealer, who are killing more Black folks than any white person with a sheet over their face. How are they doing it? Spreading these lies about the economy you had, Mr. President, before the virus was a continuation of Obama. That's just factually not true. I have a degree in accounting. I keep up with the economy. They're lying. So To all these folks on MSNBC, CNN, Roland Martin, what, you afraid to have real black Republicans who know what the hell they're talking about? If you want to know the truth, if you want us to dissect the Obama economy, let's do it. And I think, Mr. President, your record will win the debate. Thank you.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
By the way, if nobody ends up seriously ill, let alone dead, from all of the rioting and protesting of the last week, will you finally realize that how evil the continuation of lockdown is and the destroying of businesses? The scientists that have led us to this hysteria should have their names implanted in people's minds as destroyers of society. I knew it from the beginning, the hysteria. There's been hysteria over COVID. There's hysteria over police brutality. COVID exists, police brutality exists, but it doesn't mean that the reactions are coherent. So anyway, Biden said in the middle of this address, just happened to catch it, something to the effect, this is the new line. We need to live in America where a black person does not fear that he will be killed that day. Is he speaking about the inner city and killed by a fellow black? No, he's not speaking about that. He's talking about the police. That's the point. There is such a fear in the inner city. Funny, if you talk about where blacks really are suffering, you're a racist. If you talk about blacks where they're really not suffering, where it's minimal, then you're pro-black. Because the issue isn't black-white. The issue is right-left.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on The Larry Elder Show.
My guest is Jason Riley. He is the board member of the Wall Street Journal, also senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Jason, what do you think are the remaining barriers for people to escape poverty, black people?
The remaining barriers are largely government-created barriers, denying kids the ability to choose the schools they want to attend, or at least their parents choosing the schools that they want their children to attend. When black aspiring entrepreneurs want to start a business in a neighborhood, there are plenty of barriers there. So I think they're largely government barriers. I mean, you mentioned the title of one of my books, Please Stop Helping Us. I don't think there's a government solution out there that's going to save black America. I think it's mostly about black America or about government getting out of the way, minimum wage laws that price blacks out of work and so forth. You know all these arguments, but that's not how the other side measures barriers. They look at disparate outcomes, racially disparate outcomes, and wherever they see them, they assume something nefarious is going on.
Today.
Morning, glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Greetings to everyone listening on YouTube, on Instagram, at HughHewitt.com, in the universe. Wherever you're listening, welcome on this June 20th. I'm joined by Secretary Ben Carson. He helms the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Good morning, Secretary Carson. Welcome back.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Dr. Carson, you and I are not going to serve on the jury for the policeman in Minneapolis, so we can have an opinion. In your opinion, was George Floyd murdered?
Yes.
What leads you to that opinion?
Well, we don't have to guess about his case. We saw the murder taking place in front of our eyes. It was captured on video. And you have a man who has already been subdued, is in handcuffs, is under control, and then you're performing a maneuver that can take his life blatantly, knowing that people are watching and not caring.
And so Al Sharpton asked in the eulogy of George Floyd, how does such a person get into the police force of America who can keep his knee on the neck of someone for 8 minutes and 46 seconds? I ask you that question. How does that happen?
Because this is a man who already had multiple infractions and has been allowed to remain on the police force. And I think that, there are generally warnings when you have people who are, pathological like he is. And, we have to have some kind of responsibility. And I think, when we're calling for reformation of police forces, that's the kind of thing that really needs to be looked at. And the possibility of people moving from one jurisdiction to another after they're found to have violated, certain standards, that's not acceptable.
Dr. Carson, have you discussed George Floyd with President Trump?
Oh, very much so.
Does the president believe George Floyd was murdered?
Yes.
Do you encourage him to say that publicly?
The president is an individual like all the rest of us, and he has expressed, as you probably know, what he feels about that case when he was down for the Nassau launch.
Yeah, but not many people saw that. Do you think it would be helpful for him to repeat that message? Because I actually think less than 1% of America knows about the Nassau launch speech. It's actually not NASA. It was, it's Elon Musk's deal, SpaceX.
Right. Or, people could rebroadcast it. I mean, the president, obviously has a lot of different things on his mind. And we all have our opinions about what he should say and how he should say and when he should say it, what he should do. That probably is not useful.
Now, you're in the cabinet, Dr. Carson, and you know a lot of people in the administration, and you've been involved in politics since 2015. I started earlier, actually. Have you met anyone in the Trump administration who is a racist?
I have not met anyone who's a racist at all. And I don't want to get too far off into that, but I find real racists are the people who look at me and say he's black, therefore he has to think this way. And if he doesn't think this way, then he must be an Uncle Tom, he must be a race traitor, he must be this or any horrible thing they can think of. That is very racist.
Well, judging anyone by the color of their skin is by definition racist. And I believe with Dr. King, the solution to that is to have a colorblind society. But now in some circles which are more radical, they say a colorblind society is itself a racist idea. What do you think of that?
Well, I think Dr. King would probably be horrified if he were here today, seeing exactly the opposite of what his dream was. His dream being people would be judged by their character and not the color of their skin. And we have turned that completely around. And what sense does that make when you stop and think about it? What makes Hugh Hewitt who he is? Not your skin color, not your hair texture. It's your brain. It's the experiences that you've had in your life. That is so much more important than the external manifestations of who you are.
I agree, but I think it's going to be a very challenging season in America. And I look to the churches to lead here, and I don't know that many people do. Do you agree with me on that?
Oh, very much so. I mean, that is at the foundation of our nation, is our faith. And, it's on all of our money. In God we trust. And yet, as we attempt to exclude God from our society, it must be replaced with something else. And that something else does not seem to be very loving and kind.
Well, I do think there's a kindness deficit in the country, which is as large as the national debt. And that can actually be addressed. I thought Al Sharpton's eulogy for George Floyd, where he talked about passersby and the Good Samaritan, was on that point. People can't pass by injustice and they can't pass by poverty. But you see it every day in the housing and urban development. Do we see progress on those fronts in your view, Dr. Carson?
Oh, without question. We're seeing it all over. The opportunity zones have resulted in multiple new building projects, which are beautiful, and they're public-private partnerships. Those are the kinds of things that we need to do. And with the CARES Act, the money that's been invested, it's much more than we normally have. I think we have the possibility of really making a major dent in the affordable housing situation and in the homelessness situation in this country. And, look at possibilities like teleworking, which is going to become, I think, much more popular now because people have found that it can work, which will make available a lot of office space, which can potentially be converted into affordable housing. I mean, there are a lot of possibilities. We just have to open our eyes.
Yeah, Dr. Carson, I want to talk to you about one of the most controversial, ongoing issues in America, which is kneeling during the national anthem. Yesterday, one of my favorite football players, Baker Mayfield, because I'm a Cleveland Browns fan and have been since 1965, been going to their games. I'm a season ticket holder. He was asked by a supporter, a fan, would he be kneeling? He said, "Pull your head out." I absolutely am. No, I do not think it was appropriate to condemn a fan for asking a question in those terms. But what do you think about athletes kneeling during the national anthem?
I think the important thing is if they are going to kneel during the national anthem, that they make sure that people understand why they're kneeling. A lot of people are under the impression that they're kneeling because they don't respect our national anthem or they don't respect the flag or what it stands for. And in fact, I don't think that's the reason that most of them are kneeling. I think most of them are kneeling because, they want to protest some brutality in the police forces. They need to make that very clear. And of course, now that has been brought to national attention, I'm not sure if it needs to continue.
Now, Mayfield went on yesterday afternoon to say exactly that he has extraordinary respect for the military, for police, but that racial injustice in policing has to end. So he was expanding on the symbolism of the kneeling. I asked 3 members, active duty members in the military who were in my family, if they objected to players kneeling, specifically Mayfield, one of whom is a Browns fan. They said absolutely not. Now, they're active duty. All of them have been in combat zones. They said absolutely not if they do what you said, which is to explain the symbolism. And that is, to me, my problem with symbolism generally is there are no words attached to it. When someone like LeBron James talks, he usually expands at length on what he speaks. Don't we need more conversation and more explanation and fewer gestures, Dr. Carson?
Oh, that would help so much. It would be amazing how good that would be. I mean, it's sort of like when people get married, they love each other. They can't keep their hands off of each other. They're talking to each other all the time. Before they get divorced, they stop talking to each other. There's no communication. And their spouse becomes a double incarnate. That's what happens when we don't talk to each other.
So is there any chance you might persuade the president that he ought not to be upset with players kneeling during the national anthem?
Well, I don't think he has manifested as much animosity in that region lately. And I think we just continue to work with him. He'll get there.
I actually think it should not be a as the Brits like to say, a controversy, or however they pronounce it. It ought not to be controversial this year, but it might be. And I think that would be unfortunate. Now, the last thing I want to ask you about is what is going on in Seattle. I call it Biden Town, as do many people online. What do you think about that?
Well, I think, unfortunately, we've reached a point where there's so much white guilt that, people can be cajoled or seduced into doing things that don't make any sense. because they want people to say, you see, I'm not a racist, I'm a good person. And we need to just get beyond that and start using our brains and start doing things that are logical. Does it make any sense to have autonomous zones? Does it make any sense for you to be able to take over control of an area where somebody has their business and dictate to them what they must do? No, it makes no sense at all, not in the system that we have. And, you know, people are going to have to start speaking out. The reason that a lot of this stuff is going on is because a lot of the good people, a lot of people with common sense are afraid to say anything because they don't want to be ostracized. But the fact of the matter is you cannot be the land of the free if you're not the home of the brave.
Last question, Dr. Carson. Is America systemically racist?
Of course not. You know, I've seen systemic racism growing up. We are so much better than that now. Do we still have racist people? Of course. You know, you're always going to have people who think superficially and don't think deeply. But, you know, that doesn't mean that the whole system is corrupted and needs to be changed. But if you're looking to fundamentally change a society, and there are those who are looking to do that, you must first prove that it is dysfunctional. So anything that you can do that will create dysfunction helps to bolster that argument.
Are there people seeking that sort of fundamental change in your view and not for the good?
Well, we've heard people say we want to fundamentally change America. So we know that that's the case. And there have been people, you know, go way back to the Fabians. You can go even beyond them. People who have an ideal, and they're not necessarily bad people. They just have a different concept of what America should be. They think it should be a place where you give the government control and the government takes care of you from cradle to grave. And a lot of people have tried that, and it doesn't seem to work.
It does not work. Dr. Ben Carson, always a pleasure. Thank you, Doctor. I look forward to having you back throughout the year.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Hugh.
This is Owen Strand for townhall.com. A call is going out now for the dismantling of the Minneapolis Police Department. The president of the city council said this when asked about what to do in the case of a break-in.
Yes, I mean, I
news
hear
in
that
that?
loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors. And I know, and myself too, and I know that that comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more harm is done.
There's no doubt that our cities and communities need restoration, including greater peaceful engagement between police and citizens. Yet the idea that wanting protection is privilege is not sound. In fact, it's absurd and won't restore anything. Police who act unjustly are accountable to the rule of law and must be. But there is no need to qualify what a society without police will look like. More harm will surely be done. May coming days bring greater safety and meaningful restoration. I'm Owen Strand.
ADF, fighting for those whose religious freedom is being violated. America has been doing some soul searching lately. Perhaps you noticed. We're examining what's right with America and what can be made better. No other country does this kind of introspection better than us. Some of what we found we don't like and will change. Every life has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. That includes our law enforcement as well as every skin color. We've been through this before in America, and we always came out stronger. We will this time too. Our hosts will make sure of that. We are the answer.
Welcome back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. We can indeed work it out. It's America, greatest country in the history of the world. We can work it out. Right now, I want to tell you about my sponsor, AndrewandTodd.com. Andrew Del Rey, Todd Avakian. They are AndrewandTodd.com. I've known Andrew for 22 years. I was in a Bible study with him for more than a decade before I moved back east. He's one of my dearest friends. Todd Avakian I've known for 8 years now. Together they are with Sierra Pacific Mortgage, lenders of money to you if you need to refinance your house. And right now, if you haven't refinanced in the last 6 months, you're losing money. The interest rate that you will receive right now on the loan that exists is so low, you will save money. I also want to speak specifically to seniors because I talked to Andrew on Saturday, and he had just completed a reverse mortgage for a senior who was living on $2,000 a month and in a home with a lot of equity and a mortgage payment of $1,000 a month. That senior is now got no mortgage payment, $10,000 in equity, and is going to live in that house for the rest of their lives, provided they pay their taxes like we all have to pay our property taxes. That is what reverse mortgages can do. And if you find yourself with a retirement that is shattered by the market collapse, and I think most of that has been restored, but you're worried and you're a senior and you're sitting on a house full of equity, you need to call my friends Andrew Del Rey and Todd Avakian, and they are my friends, at 888-888-1172. Call them or go online if you're comfortable online. I am comfortable online, but some of our senior citizens aren't. You go to andrewandtodd.com and answer a couple of questions, and they'll be back to you with the very best option, and they will walk you through it. Don't agree to anything until you actually talk to andrewandtodd.com. I didn't hear you, Adam. Now, to the Ben Carson tape. I actually think it should not be a as the Brits like to say, a controversy, or however they pronounce it. It ought not to be controversial this year, but it might be. And I think that would be unfortunate. Now, the last thing I want to ask you about is what is going on in Seattle. I call it Biden Town, as do many people online. What do you think about that?
Well, I think, unfortunately, we've reached a point where there's so much white guilt that, people can be cajoled or seduced into doing things that don't make any sense because they want people to say, you see, I'm not a racist, I'm a good person. And we need to just get beyond that and start using our brains and start doing things that are logical. Does it make any sense to have autonomous zones? Does it make any sense for you to be able to take over control of an area where somebody has their business and dictate to them what they must do? No, it makes no sense at all, not in the system that we have. And, people are going to have to start speaking out. The reason that a lot of this stuff is going on is because a lot of the good people, a lot of people with common sense are afraid to say anything because they don't want to be ostracized. But the fact of the matter is you cannot be the land of the free if you're not the home of the brave.
Last question, Dr. Carson. Is America systemically racist?
Of course not. I've seen systemic racism growing up. We are so much better than that now. Do we still have racist people? Of course. You're always going to have people who think superficially and don't think deeply. But, that doesn't mean that the whole system is corrupted and needs to be changed. But if you're looking to fundamentally change a society, and there are those who are looking to do that, you must first prove that it is dysfunctional. So anything that you can do that will create dysfunction helps to bolster that argument.
Are there people seeking that sort of fundamental change in your view and not for the good?
Well, we've heard people say we want to fundamentally change America. So we know that that's the case. And there have been people, go way back to the Fabians. You can go even beyond them. People who have an ideal, and they're not necessarily bad people. They just have a different concept of what America should be. They think it should be a place where you give the government control and the government takes care of you from cradle to grave. And a lot of people have tried that, and it doesn't seem to work.
It does not work. Dr. Ben Carson, always a pleasure. Thank you, Doctor. I look forward to having you back throughout the year.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Hugh.
Come right back, America. Poor Steelers fans trying to figure out what the Fabians played for.
Trending now on the Mike Gallagher Show.
Mayor Jenny Durkin appeared with Chris Cuomo on CNN and characterized this takeover of a neighborhood in Seattle where you just heard the police chief characterize people pelting police officers with projectiles, screaming at them, attacking, and ultimately taking it over. But the mayor says these patriots are sort of just having a giant, fun-filled block party.
So I don't have to tell you about the situation on the ground in your city, but in terms of how it looks to the rest of the country and the president teeing it up as basically ineptitude, the inability to control your own streets, is that fair criticism?
So I know it will shock you that the president is perhaps not giving an accurate or truthful picture. We've got 4 blocks in Seattle that you just saw pictures of that is more like a block party atmosphere. It's not an armed takeover. It's not a military junta. We will make sure that we can restore this, but we have block parties and the like in this part of Seattle all the time. It's known for that. So I think the president, number one, there is no threat right now to the public, and we're taking that very seriously. We're meeting with businesses and residents. But what the president threatened is illegal and unconstitutional. And the fact that he can think he can just tweet that and not have ramifications is just wrong.
I don't even know where to begin.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Dennis Prager Show.
That's a good question to ask a leftist friend. Do you agree with Lincoln said that America is the last best hope of mankind or of the earth? But they would say no. Typical article I have here, The Atlantic, which produces massive amounts of nonsense by intellectuals. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's become nihilistic. We are living in a failed state. The coronavirus didn't break America. It revealed what was already broken. And this guy's a staff writer, George Packer, for The Atlantic. I invite George Packer onto the show. It's useless. It's useless. They never debate. Isn't that interesting? Why don't they debate? We would go on any of their shows, any. I remember being on CNN. Don Lemon used to invite me pretty often. And everybody else disagreed with me. I don't care.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
I'll go on MSNBC.
Good, can you see me
But they
okay
would
too?
never come on here. But then they would never have us on there. That's the point. The self-delusion of the left that they are the world of reason. That's so amazing. We are the irrational in their eyes.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
This is Owen Strand for townhall.com. A call is going out now for the dismantling of the Minneapolis Police Department. The president of the city council said this when asked about what to do in the case of a break-in.
Yes, I mean, I hear that loud and clear from a lot of my neighbors. And I know, and myself too, and I know that comes from a place of privilege, because for those of us for whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in that reality, where calling the police may mean more harm is done.
There's no doubt that our cities and communities need restoration, including greater peaceful engagement between police and citizens. Yet the idea that wanting protection is privilege is not sound. In fact, it's absurd and won't restore anything. Police who act unjustly are accountable to the rule of law and must be. But there is no need to qualify what a society without police will look like. More harm will surely be done. May coming days bring greater safety and meaningful restoration. I'm Owen Strand.
ADF, fighting for those whose religious freedom is being violated. America has been doing some soul searching lately. Perhaps you noticed. We're examining what's right with America and what can be made better. No other country does this kind of introspection better than us. Some of what we found we don't like and will change. Every life has the right to be treated with dignity and respect. That includes our law enforcement as well as every skin color. We've been through this before in America, and we always came out stronger. We will this time too. Our hosts will make sure of that. We are the answer.
Welcome back, America. 33 minutes after the hour. Joined now by Madeline Osborn of the Federalist. She's a staff writer there. Good morning, Madeline. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well.
Madeline, give us a little background before we talk about the piece you wrote about the National Security Council. How'd you get to the Federalist? Where'd you come from? What did you do beforehand?
Actually, my story is pretty unique. I started interning for the Federalist as soon as I graduated college in 2015, and they just wouldn't let me leave. So I've been there ever since.
That is unusual in Washington. Where'd you do your undergrad?
Abilene Christian University.
Wonderful. That means that you're a Texan transplanted, right? Are you originally a Texan?
Yes, sir. So I am. I was born and raised. I went to school in Abilene, and then I moved to D.C. for about 4 or 5 years, and I actually just moved back to Dallas. So good to be back in Texas.
Okay, so how did you get the scoop on the National Security Council? Because it was a scoop. Robert O'Brien is a friend of mine, but I didn't know that this had happened there.
Yeah, absolutely. How all scoops work, right? Someone tips you off to something that the rest of the media isn't really paying attention to. So it's really historic, and we were happy to be able to be the first to publish it.
Tell people about it, because I won't steal your thunder. I did not know it, but I always read the Federalist, and I said, wow, that's actually a milestone, and nobody noticed it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the first time in history, half of the senior leaders of the National Security Council are women. So there used to be, under the Obama administration, this organization, the NSC, had bloated to over 200 people. And that was part of what Robert O'Brien had wanted to do. He came out about 9 months ago and said he wanted to streamline and slim things down, as is often something the Trump administration has tried to do to bloated bureaucracies. And so now there are 24 directorates, and half of those 12 are women, which is, I think, unprecedented and really unique and awesome.
What does a director of the National Security Council do? Can you give me some examples of these 24 people's titles or areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So they're mostly advisors to the president, but there's 2 different types of directorate. There's the functional type, and then there's the regional type. So the functional ones tackle different issues, working with international organizations or border security or a pandemic response. And all 3 of those are now led by women. And then the other type is a regional directorate, which they cover certain areas of the globe. So Africa, Asia, South Asia, and those areas are all also led by women.
Now tell me a little bit about, I only know one of the, I know O'Brien, I know his deputy Pottinger a little bit, but I know Mark Vandroff, who is, I believe, the NSC director for the Pentagon, but I don't know anybody else. Who are these people? Where do they come from? What was your experience talking to them?
So I mostly only talk to the women, but they are just like jaw-droppingly, like their resumes just blow you out of the water, right? They have amazing, incredible careers where they, were creating new paths for women at the State Department. They often most of them speak multiple languages. They have been, all over the world. Elizabeth Aaron Walsh, she was a director for Goldman Sachs for their Asia Pacific region. So they just have like these incredible resumes. And you can see why the president would want them advising them on these different global issues.
Tell me about the one you just mentioned. What is her directorate?
So she is the director for African affairs. She, before that, she was the assistant secretary of commerce for global markets. And then before that, that's when she was at Goldman Sachs, and she lived in Hong Kong, and she lived in Beijing, and then she worked at Cisco, and she worked at the State Department for 10 years, working with the UN and the Department of Energy, and like just had her hands in everything. And so that was Elizabeth Aaron Walsh. And then Sue Bai, she is the deputy assistant to the president and like the legal advisor to the NSC. So she used to be in the president's counsel's office, and she was also used to be a prosecutor at DOJ. So just the list goes on and on of their incredible experiences.
So I have not seen any other article mention that for the first time in history, half of the directors at the NSC are women. Have you?
No, I haven't yet. And I think that's really the most incredible part of the story, right? Because, I mean, we saw this even with the all the women that were running for president, this time last year, right? There was this Vanity Fair cover with Kristen Gillibrand and Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren and everyone except Tulsi Gabbard. But, they had this big fancy photo shoot with Annie Leibovitz at Vanity Fair. And, those people weren't even in the White House yet. And they were having these photo shoots and this media attention lauded for them, all the Democrats, the Democratic women, that is. And then you have actual, women running the world from the White House, and it's crickets.
Well, I've told O'Brien he spends way too much time worried about important issues and not enough time about the media. But of course, it's usually the opposite in D.C.
Right.
Does it actually mean anything to you, Madeleine, as a young woman? Does it mean anything to you?
To me personally, it does, because especially for I see this in my own workplace at the Federalist. We also have a majority of women writers. We kind of laugh at the Federalist because you'll see sometimes the Washington Post or the New York Times a reporter will tweet out, today all the bylines on our front page are women bylines, and we're like, welcome to our Tuesday at the Federalist, and so I in a way I'm used to that, but I like to see it in our government and in our administration, and seeing President Trump put his money where his mouth is, and allowing I think something about women in the workplace is just making being pro-family, being pro-growth, and allowing them the flexibility that they need to raise their families, and that's something that we do at the Federalist. And so I know Ivanka Trump has pushed for that and has been part of that, but I think President Trump himself did that long before he was president in his own companies.
Well, Madeleine, it's a great piece. You got a good scoop, and I appreciate it. What is your Twitter handle?
It's Madeline Orr, ORR. That's my maiden name, and I just never changed it. But yeah, Madeline Orr.
That's okay. I kept thinking that Generalissimo, my producer, had screwed up because it's Madeline Osborn is your name, but then it kept saying Madeline Orr, and I thought that can't be right. But you actually mean you got something right?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. Well, thank you, Madeline Orr. E-L-I-N-E. Madeline is often spelled different ways. M-A-D-E-L-I-N-E. O-R-R. I've just tweeted out your article again. Congratulations, Madeline. Big scoop, and I wish the rest of the country would know that. I appreciate your time. Now I want to take a couple of calls, if possible. 1-800-520-1234. What did you think of Ben Carson? Ben Carson does not object to players kneeling for the national anthem because he understands them to be kneeling against racist policing tactics and racism in society and unnecessary use of police force. It is not common, but he is accepting the explanation, for example, of Baker Mayfield yesterday. I wrote to 3 members of my family who are active duty military. Did they object to Baker Mayfield? No, not one of them did. They don't care because he explained himself. Now, I object to Baker telling a fan, pull your head out. Because the whole business depends upon fans. Every business of professional sports depends upon fans. And so they ask you a question. You can respectfully say, yes, I am going to kneel, and here's why, which is what Baker changed to later. He's a fiery guy, he's an emotional guy. But understand, there's going to be a division of opinion on this. There is going to be a deep division of opinion on this. But pretty much every player in the NFL is going to kneel. I think that is almost a given. I think that's almost a given. I am not going to stop watching the Browns. I am not upset with Baker. Originally, I was upset. I said, why do you treat a fan that way? But he explained himself. Good. If I were him, I'd apologize to the fan, too. He didn't do that. We'll see. But what do you think? Ben Carson thinks the president should lay off of it. I do, too. What do you think? 1-800-520-1234. And we are going to post the Ben Carson interview in its totality because there is Ben Carson always makes news. He always comes on. He's soft-spoken, the quietest man in the world. Really one of the most inspiring guys I've met. I got booed during the debates in 2016. I guess it was 2015. I said, Dr. Carson, do you have what it takes to kill people? Something like that. Because he's such a gentle man. And you've got to kill people like al-Baghdadi. When you're president, like President Trump does, you have to order the execution of Soleimani. You have to drone people. I got booed by the audience. And I said, well, you know, he's just such a nice man. I really don't know if he could do it. And he assured me he could. And he's fearless. He's absolutely fearless. Ben Carson is one of my favorite guests. And my phones are all lit, but Ben's going here a little bit slow. We'll get to him. 1-800-520-1234. Just put Will up in Pennsylvania. Hello, Will. What do you have to say?
Good morning, Hugh. Thanks for taking the call. I just wanted to weigh in on your question and the conversation you had with Dr. Carson. Here's my problem with kneeling. I'm 62 years old. I'm a veteran. My son's active duty right now. And if you remember, the kneeling did not start as kneeling. My problem is with the starting point.
You're dropping out, Will. You're talking about Colin Kaepernick and how he has said anti-American stuff?
Colin Kaepernick initiated this whole movement.
Yeah, but Will, I agree, but we're running out of time, so I want a short circuit. It's different now than it was then, and I think it's important that people understand that.
They need to have a different starting point, and it needs to be connected to a different person. His conduct then and his conduct after that, with the socks that he wore and sitting, were disrespectful, and that's what I remember.
Interesting, Will. Thank you. Thank you. And tell your son I appreciate his service. I appreciate yours. Linda in Atlanta, where another police killing occurred over the weekend. Hello, Linda.
Yes. Hey, Hugh. Hope you're having a good morning.
I am.
What I would sincerely like to ask Dr. Ben Carson is, would it also be okay to say, or would a Republican conservative be pilloried for this? Black lives matter, but black jobs matter and black families matter. And we have to work on all of those things. If you don't have those other pieces of the puzzle.
Oh, I'm sure he'd agree with that, Linda. I'm sure he'd agree with that. Thank you. Joe in San Diego, 30 seconds. Joe, go ahead.
You know, being a retired naval veteran, I just wasn't a retired Navy. Where does it end? You know, you say now kneeling's okay. You know, we talk about Hillsdale moment, and now it's time to practice it. And we're going to just watch the same people. Black Lives Matter and all that stuff, the kneeling and all that stuff, and the burning, that's what you should, because that is affiliated with that. And if it's not about the flag, why are you doing it during the national anthem? You know,
as I said, it's going to be very controversial, and people need to explain. Less symbolism, more talking. That's what I believe. Joe, thanks for the call. Got to tell you about ReliefFactor.com. I pay for the program every day. There it is. Take it in the morning. Make sure I'm going out for my run right afterwards. Got lunch today. But in between, I'm going to try and lay down my 6. I think it's not raining outside. I haven't looked out the studio yet. And you should be doing that every day, especially as you get older. Yesterday's Wall Street Journal. It is so critical. Even if you've never done anything, even if you are, morbidly obese and it's not worth it. Yes, it is. Start today with a few steps. Start today with a few steps. Tim Alberta is next, America. Stay tuned.
Trending now on America First with Sebastian Gorka.
This is the state of play. And what is the response from the left? Mr. Mayor, please listen to Governor Jay Inslee of Washington State, where some of the worst violence is occurring, on his responsibility or lack thereof to the people of his state.
Thing called the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. What's your thought on that? The fact that the protesters have taken that over and not allowing people to come and go freely? Regarding the National Guard.
Well, that's news to me, so I'll have to reserve any comment about it. I have not heard anything about that from any credible source. Not that you're not credible. It's just like before I espouse an opinion, I should know of which I speak.
Should a governor be laughing about losing control of the streets of one of his cities, Mr. Matt?
I'm not surprised, Sebastian. Are you?
I'm not, but what does this mean for the people living in Seattle in Washington State?
Well, I mean, I hope that the American people can observe all this and they can see there's no coincidence that the worst riots, the most destruction, the most loss of human life and property occurred in cities and states governed by Democrats. It didn't happen in cities governed by Republicans. And riots didn't happen in my city until it got a Democratic mayor again. The last riot was under a Democratic mayor. I avoided them for 8 years, and Bloomberg did it for 12. And it's not hard to do it if you activate the police to get them to stop it. These people, I don't know what has happened to them. They almost seem like anarchists rather than members of a responsible political party.
Keep up with what's trending. Subscribe on YouTube today. Trending now on the Eric Metaxas Show.
For folks like you and me, this was a moment ago, especially for you. You lived through this. You were an adult. This was your friend. This was a student. And the parallels with what are happening in this country today are so striking. I mean, we could have talked about this book just because it's the 50th anniversary and it's a good book and it's interesting. And, you and I have met. But I mean, the parallels to what is happening right now in this country are just crazy similar. And so I do want to talk about that. Now, look, there's a lot of young people listening to this program who don't have a clue what was going on around that time. So frame it for us. In this novel, Hippies, which is based on real life events, obviously, you just told us 2 of your friends were killed. Students were killed. I mean, I still can't get my head around this.
All right. It was good.
No, go ahead. So frame it for people who don't know anything about Kent State or whatever.
Right. Well, back then in 1969, 1970, it was all about the Vietnam War, and the attitude of the country was changing.
Trending. Subscribe on YouTube today.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt, joined now Politico Magazine, Tim Alberta. Good morning, Tim. How are you?
Hugh, I'm wonderful. How are you?
Well, I'm good. I was thrown for a loop when Baker Mayfield sort of barked at a fan on Instagram, "Get your head out." Of course, I'm going to kneel. I wasn't upset with the kneeling. I was upset with being disrespectful with a fan who might disagree. But then Baker explained himself at length as to what his kneeling meant. Then I asked the 3 members of my family who are active duty military, all of whom have either been in or are in combat zones. None of them object to Baker Mayfield. We got Browns fans, you might be surprised, in my family. What do you think about it, Tim? And Ben Carson, by the way, said he's going to talk to the president about not being upset about this. What do you, a Lions fan, think about this?
So I think, to be honest, Hugh, I think there's probably going to be an evolution for a lot of fans, and that includes
You're breaking up, Tim. You got to get. You said there's going to be an evolution for a lot of fans, and you broke up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I said I think there's going to be an evolution for a lot of fans here, and that includes, friends and family members of mine who looked at this very differently a couple of years ago and are going to look at it, I think, in sort of a new light this season when they see what we all expect to be, mass demonstrations, tons of players kneeling, if not every player kneeling or participating in some sort of a coordinated demonstration. And so I think I think there's an acknowledgement now, and some of this I think has to do with just just people gaining more information. I think a lot of fans weren't aware necessarily, for example, that Kaepernick initially had sat on the bench, and then after talking with a veteran had decided to kneel because they thought that was a more respectful thing. That's just one example, but I do think that as people gain more information about this, and as more players come out and say, no, this isn't about the flag, this isn't about the military, this is about exercising our right to peacefully protest in this way, I think more and more people are going to be comfortable with it. That's a slow evolution, though.
Now, Tim, I went back and read everything Kaepernick has said, because it was pointed out to me by a non-family member and just now by a caller. Kaepernick is actually quite radical. He condemned American imperialism when Soleimani was taken out, for example. He is very radical. Baker Mayfield said he's against police violence where it's not necessary. Is it necessary for the players to speak more in connection with their symbolism and their gestures? Because I think gestures are subject to misinterpretation a lot. I think LeBron has always been very good about this. He talks at length as opposed to gesturing.
Yeah. Look, so a couple of things, Hugh. And I wrote about this a little bit in my book. I mean, look, yeah, Kaepernick is not the perfect sort of figurehead for this movement, right? I mean, he came under a lot of criticism when he said after 2016 that he didn't vote because he sort of drew an equivalence between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and he said, what's the difference? And a lot of people hit him for that. So I don't think Kaepernick is ever going to be remembered as the perfect person to sort of lead this movement. But what he did was obviously sort of break new ground and started conversation. And now you have other people who are willing to pick up that ball, no pun intended, and carry it, I think, further than Kaepernick ever could. I mean, when you have, the LeBron Jameses of the world, and I think more importantly, when you have, white players with a huge platform, whether it's
Baker Mayfield.
Well, Baker Mayfield hasn't done anything. So
yes, he did over the weekend. You missed it. Did you miss it over the weekend?
No,
Baker.
I'm talking about on the football field.
Yeah, he said it's coming. He just said, of course I'm kneeling. That's what he said.
But the J.J. Watts of the world, the Aaron Rodgers of the world.
I see.
When you have white players who are very accomplished, who are now going to be taking ownership of this, I think that really matters, and those are the things that the history books are going to record. I think in some ways just as much as what Kaepernick.
Now, Ben Carson just told me he's going to ask the president to understand that. You think Ben Carson will be successful in doing so?
Probably not, if I'm being honest with you, because I've had conversations with other advisors and friends of the president who are black, who have, including Senator Tim Scott, who have talked candidly about their attempts to get through to the president on some of these issues, and they all wind up saying the same thing, which is that they think the president means well and they think he's receptive and that he'll listen, but that it's very difficult to change the mind of any mid-70s white man from the Queens who is sort of programmed culturally to think a certain way, and that people that age don't really change.
It'll be interesting for you to follow this story. As a sports fan, I think this is a big story. Do you agree with it? I think this is a big story. It could either break the NFL or diffuse the issue. What do you think? You got 30 seconds, Tim.
Yeah, I agree with you. And look, what we're seeing now with this ground shifting in real time, public opinion on issues of racial justice, everything else, I do think that translates way beyond politics. And so, when NASCAR is banning the Confederate flag, that's real. That's something.
But defund the police and Bidentown in Seattle, isn't that something too?
Oh, sure. I mean, look, I think it's all something. But to your question about the NFL, absolutely. Yeah, this is a real thing, and we're going to have to pay a lot of attention to it moving forward.
It is. And boy, Roger Goodell leading it. Oh my gosh. Tim Alberta. Follow him on Twitter. I'll be back tomorrow, America, on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.